Hello and welcome to another episode of Tradecraft Tuesday. This is episode 16. It is December 2020, December of the year that shall not be named. You called it, this is the last Tradecraft Tuesday of the year that we all want to forget. But before we forget about it, we're actually going to do like a whole recap on it. So we're going to do like a 2020 Tradecraft recap and talk about what's all the different stuff that happened, and what used to happen like previously, and what are we seeing now. And then at the end, we're going to throw in some predictions, and then maybe next year we can come back and see like how accurate we were.
Is that like a same versus changed theme here that I see going?
Yep. I figured it was the easiest way to cover it. Otherwise, everything we put in here was just kind of like all over. So
my kids were just teasing me that 2020 was just the trailer and the main event is happening in 2021. I hope that's not the truth. I hope we get some change in 2021 for sure.
Yes.
So just as a reminder, anybody that's live, please make sure to set your chat to all panelists and attendees. The interactive part is the biggest part of our community, what people enjoy. Obviously, if you're watching this on recording, we are stoked to have you as well, but you should definitely join us. Same thing. Being that this is a recap, this is a perfect time for tons of interactivity. We're going to do quite a bit of just Q&A back and forth. Want to make sure that we're getting opinions, especially since so much of this is both topics that we've covered and brand new stuff that sadly we kind of foreshadowed earlier in the year that was going to happen. We'll also end it with a good old fashioned 2021 prediction. So Chris, with that said, we always kick off with a little bit of news. Do we want to dive in?
Yep. So following that same theme of things that stayed the same, things that changed, we're gonna do some new news and some old news, which maybe olds. I'm not sure how that works.
Oh, news and olds.
Yeah.
Well, jump into news.
Yeah. So first of all, I got an article here from Threat Post, and this is about GoDaddy employees being tricked into vendor phishing, or what the term that I learned today, vishing, into giving up access to other people's sites. So I thought that was kind of scary. In this case, it was like two crypto mining, crypto exchange sites, and attackers were able to control their domains for a while and read emails and see stuff. So yeah, kind of crazy. Yes, somebody posted in chat that is like very similar to what happened to Twitter. Totally agreed. Yep, they social engineered their support people.
Same story, different day. Same versus changed, right? Same TTP as Twitter was attacked earlier this year. What changed? It just happened to be a different vendor. I see no reason that it won't continue. GoDaddy today. Any cloud service providers joining us, you should definitely prepare for this. It's hitting the largest right now, but there's no reason this won't move downstream.
Yep. So moving on. Nothing really new here. More ransomware. In this case, though, the company that it hit is a big deal. So in this case, Foxconn got hit by ransomware. And for anybody who's not familiar, Foxconn is a big electronics manufacturer and stuff like that. They manufacture a large amount of Apple products, iPhones, and stuff like that. So I don't know what this ended up doing to Apple's supply chain for iPhone 12s, but I'm guessing it impacted in some way.
Now, from what I understand, it was the Mexican facility. So I know some are made all over. Foxconn is not small. But what was wild is, not just Apple, you name it. If you're shipping peripherals, IoT devices, things along those lines, it's coming through Foxconn if it's of quality. So definitely interesting. One of those things that I enjoy most of this is it's always I'm thinking about the CISO or the IT department that's trying to explain to the board, or the MSP who's trying to explain to the customers of, how could they come after me? They just don't care. Like if honestly Foxconn, a multi-billion-dollar international organization, can't stop it from happening, drop the whole BS of why didn't my prevention stop this? Like neither did theirs, right? It's, more of the same when this. So Chris, did you have anything, or John, I know you live in the ransomware all day. I mean, was this even surprising? Is it just, at this point in 2020, another day?
Yeah, it's just another day, run of the mill, sadly.
Yeah. $34 million ransom is not run of the mill. I don't know about you. I don't got that pocket. I don't got that pocket scratch laying around, but
But Foxconn probably does, as big as they are.
Yeah, and this was for anybody that's keeping track. This is the Doppelpaymer team. We've seen some MSP activity of the, the affiliates from Doppelpaymer, and Chris Lair from Solus is, we do a lot of joint interactivity with them on webinars, and he is just, who's bartered with this team directly, and he said, "Hey, man, some of these affiliates are just ruthless. Doppelpaymer being one of them." So. I wish the best to Foxconn and the poor IT team or the outsourced, support, because that seems brutal.
Yeah.
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 And like the attackers, in that article, they referenced that they specifically went after the backups. They destroyed the backups and they went after servers and didn't bother with the workstations at all.
Yeah. I mean,
Makes
that's understanding the lay of the land, the critical infrastructure, what's going to be most likely to get them to pay. I mean, it's the same savvy we've seen over and over. But Chris, you had some rhyme and reason, right, to why you wanted to cover the olds as well. I think some of this sets us up really well for the recap.
Yep.
I know the very first article, and one of the things that we were excited to do this year was, we managed to, help with some other security researchers in the FBI. This whole year after 2019 was just ruthless, with MSPs themselves being used to distribute ransomware to all the clients. There was a quick win in early, I think it was late 2019, and then the arrest came in 2020. You want to give some background in this whole story?
Yep. So we were doing some stuff. We were actually tipped by another MSP vendor that some stuff was going down on the dark web that related to an MSP in the community. We didn't know exactly who it was, but we knew it was an MSP. So we actually wrote this up in a blog. So if you're curious about all the details, it's in there. But at a high level, we went to the dark web. We kind of social engineered the attacker to figure out who it was. And we kind of played the game of like, hey, we need more details to make sure that we can understand if this is real. And some of the stuff they gave us, we were able to do some, open source research, intelligence gathering and stuff. And we figured out who it was, who the MSP was. And we, kind of worked backwards to try and notify them and let them know that this had happened. And as the, as we continued to pull the thread, as did some of the journalists in the channel and the FBI, they unraveled it, and it came all the way back to a former employee of the MSP who was selling access to the end customers.
Yeah, I was just pulling up some of the screenshots in case nobody had ever seen this before, but here it is. I got in with phishing the credentials. Turns out that was complete bogus, right? This was no hacker at all. This was a insider that happened to use this. But I guess maybe, Jonas, there's some icing on the cake of this, that even though this was right, from 2019, beginning of 2020, we were really at the high of MSPs being targeted. Would you say, even though ransomware has definitely continued, we've definitely had partners that were hit? I don't want to steal any of your thunder going into the ransomware side, but would you say this is kind of downward trending in 2020 now, at least at the end?
Yeah, we've definitely not heard of as many incidents involving MSPs directly as we had in 2019. So it's, I think the height of it was probably mid to late 2019.
Yeah.
And this year's been
kind of brutal.
Less eventful.
Yeah.
With that Foxconn incident, and I know ransomware is on everybody's mind. We had another, kind of trend, Chris, and I know this one was, as a former exploit developer who has definitely abused vulnerable drivers before, I was wondering if you would cover this one, recap for our team of like, why was this, hackers carrying around the gigabyte driver to kill off antivirus products? You want to give it just a real quick high level again for the team, what this was, how it works, and why did it matter? Because I know for a fact this segues into some of our same versus change theme.
Yep. So to give a little technical background, when you have a signed driver, you have to get a driver. It has to be signed by Microsoft or co-signed so that you can load it into the operating system. Otherwise, you have to play all these games with turning off driver signing verification, which is not common and requires like rebooting into secure mode and stuff. So anyway, what attackers have realized they can do is they can take these old drivers that are signed, that are capable of being loaded by anyone with admin privileges. They can load them into the kernel, and then they can exploit them because they have vulnerabilities that are known and that sometimes are patched, sometimes are not. But when they carry around the old version of the driver, they can just exploit it and get kernel access if they have any admin privileges.
Yeah.
So,
and Chris, I'm highlighting some of these here, right? The very first thing this article highlighted was, once in the kernel, what could you do? You want to dive into that?
Yep. So we've heard a lot from people as we've started doing some of our antivirus stuff where they've said, hey, what are you doing to protect, Huntress are doing to protect this or that or the other from, admin privileges and stuff. And there's a whole bunch of things that you can do in games that you can play and try to be protected. But what this allows you to do is once you're in kernel mode, a lot of those protections no longer mean anything because you have like the core of the computer and you can do whatever you want. And so that's why attackers want it, because they can get into the kernel and they can disable other antivirus solutions and they can turn them off.
Yep. So, I mean, we're going to cover that a little bit more as we're seeing hackers change some of their tradecraft. We definitely saw more of this. John, I know you'd seen other drivers too. It wasn't just Gigabyte driver. There was the Capcom driver that I don't even know that was a vulnerability. That was more of a feature that would allow you to directly execute stuff. That hackers are still doing this, trying to get, to run as privileged code, whether that's full administrative rights in user space, or that's truly ring zero in the kernel itself. Unfortunately, I don't know if those that saw that article, this was the Robinhood ransomware gang, emphasis on Robin, Robbin. So very punny there. But you're starting to see this innovation that's instead of just coming from the APT actors, targeting nation state, other adversaries, maybe terrorism efforts, you're starting to see these cyber crime gangs evolving techniques that I would argue are just as sophisticated as APT, but with a completely different business model in mind. And I don't think, I think it would be a crime not to highlight one of the, more interesting events that happened in 2020 when it came to ransomware, which is the Maze actors themselves. I'm curious, end of October, Maze came out and said, hey, we've made our bajillions, we're shutting down. Anybody that's following along in the chat, anybody believe this whatsoever? Do they think that, Maze is truly shutting down? Are they going to rebrand themselves as somebody else, kind of like GanCrab? I'm super curious on how people think about it.
It seems people are suggesting no, and that they're just rebranding.
I mean, every now and then, right? I can think of, especially for like our MSP partners, all of us know that MSP that it's like, their last name and the word tech added to it. It's like Rogers Tech or, or some two generic words, Computer Technologies Incorporated. Yeah, you got to rebrand sometimes. So maybe Maze wasn't there for them. I don't know about you, that their branding here. I mean, there's definitely some ransomware groups that I'm thinking of that have much better looking landing pages, albeit they were vicious, right? This was a team that, would do and release their own data leaks. They were some of the first with that double extortion techniques, as this mentions. And this is something that, even in this article started saying it wasn't just Doppelpaymer, who we covered, or the Revel Sodinikibi group. You don't hear about Klopp as much anymore, but this is where we're going of seeing like, City of Pensacola, Canon, LG, etc. Like this is just wild to see. So we'll see what happens. I think I'm probably like the chat. Old habits die hard. Maybe if I'm just rolling in my infinite amounts of Bitcoin in my Russian basement or whatever, maybe that's the case. But to be honest, I think at minimum, there's probably going to be selling of that code base, improving better affiliate programs. And I'll save some of that till when we get to our 2021 predictions. So Chris and John, I think that summarizes our news, but you and I both know that like, there's way more to this than just the ransomware. There's a lot of tradecraft, right? So John, do you mind by any chance giving us a real quick, introduction? We've all heard about ransomware. Let's tell them real quick about, what's some of the same, let's focus on what's changing and let's get into some of that other tradecraft that's not just ransomware focused.
And so you want to start specifically with like the ransomware stuff, or
let's go into some of that tradecraft. We did a Tradecraft Tuesday episode earlier in this year that actually talked about a lot of the different mechanisms that led to ransomware. We've talked about it because almost every business, this is on their mind. It's a legitimate business threat nowadays. But I don't think we need to beat that dead horse since the show is about tradecraft. I'm curious, you mentioned, Sodinikibi, but there's some new, malware families that are emerging. You want to talk about one that you've seen maybe, start emerging? And I think, I don't know how you pronounce it, but did you mention like egregor? Is that the fancy word?
That's the new ransomware. It's similar to Sodinikibi. What are we going to? Sorry, go ahead.
I think it's one of those of, we know that the same actors are still trying to monetize their attacks.
Doing the same thing. Yeah. one of the things like that we mentioned in the Foxconn is the attackers are taking a little bit longer to start the encryption. Back in 2019, we would see TrickBot dropped, and then immediately we would see Ryuk ransomware, and the encryption would happen within a few minutes. But that double extortion thing where they're poking around a little bit, figuring out what to go after, what data to steal, and then they encrypt. And then specifically focusing on that big game hunting of going after servers rather than just spending time dealing with workstations.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys had seen, talk about hot off the press, right? Ransomware doing the same thing. I always find it super interesting of who's the new target du jour. So I, this morning, started looking into, egregor, and one, I was shocked. I forgot in the US, Kmart is still in business. But just a couple of days ago,
Really?
poor Kmart was,
shocked.
retailers suffered from this incident. And I think when I did a quick control F, searching through here, I think when I looked at this, I recognized some of it being down, and it looks like it's egregor that's behind it. Let me see if they actually call it. Oh, there it is. Has learned that Kmart suffered an attack. So, same old TTP, different actor.
Gosh, ransom somebody who's not bankrupt, maybe. That's a better idea.
Oh, God.
Sheesh.
You're really going for the jugular there. So, guys, I mean, we've talked about this before, that attackers are definitely taking longer to initiate the encryption. They're getting the foothold. They're getting some access. I know this sets us up for some of the other TTPs we're going to talk about, but does somebody want to share a little bit more of what they're doing once they gain that initial access? Maybe, role play, you guys be the shady, affiliate working on behalf of ransomware. If you got into Kmart, what are you guys seeing from your own TTPs, and what do you think they were doing in that network?
Yep. So we've seen a decent amount of this, and we kind of talked about this actually when we did the Tradecraft Tuesday as part of Hackett. That it looks like, and we were kind of confused on this initially, because like John said, in 2019 we saw as soon as access was given, they would drop Ryuk and they would ransom. And then we kind of saw this change where like we would see TrickBot installed or something else installed to give them their initial access, and their ransom wouldn't happen right away. And as we kept looking into it, we found that they were looking at what was on the machine, and they were trying to figure out where did they have access to, what data was there, was this a customer who could pay a lot, right? They wanted to kind of differentiate between home user, who, maybe a $300 ransom was likely to get paid, but you don't want to ransom Kmart with a $300 ransom. Like, yep. You're just not shooting high enough. And so they wanted to figure out where they were, what data they could get. And then a lot of this really transitioned with Maze, where they were trying to find the goods, download the goods, so that they really have that extra leverage on you to say, hey, if you don't pay, we're going to take all your data and we're going to give it to everybody.
Yeah. For those that aren't familiar with that double extortion, just a quick reminder, that's the encrypting of your files. And so to get access back to your files, that's one extortion. But then the second one was, well, we have a copy of your files. We're either going to sell it, disclose it. We're going to write to auditors and tell them you've been compromised. We're going to, literally show, some of them I've even seen. And there was a rumor about, that actually made it to news this week, that some of these attackers are actually calling the companies through these almost like cold calling type services to let them know, or to stir the pot a little bit. So it's wild how this big game hunting is starting to get much more personal. Daly put a hilarious chat to us as panelists, but I've got to share it. Guys, I got to know, with this whole Kmart situation, do you think when Kmart's incident response team, right after they call the insurance, IR comes in, do you think they're going to be able to negotiate like a blue light special discount on the ransom? Or
yeah, maybe. I mean, if you're the ransomware actors, you're looking for any kind of money, and like some money is better than no money. So yeah, they'll probably get a refund on this, or just.
Oh, God. What's the return policy? Can they return? Okay, I'll stop.
Oh, payments, layaway.
Ooh, that's a good one too. It is the holidays, right? Let's be aware. Yep. Kmart has had a hard time. They might need that layaway policy to be able to get their data back.
We'll pay you next year. No.
Is this open us up for like libel and slander?
Maybe.
Oh yeah. I
was gonna say, one of the things about taking longer to poke around, we've seen tools like once they get in, they enumerate with some of the Active Directory tools to dump credentials and move around. But you got to find, if you're going to do the double extortion, you got to make sure that you destroy those backups. So you got to find those backups.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Otherwise, you can just recover. Maybe that was some of it. They may have realized that they're encrypting, but people were just able to recover. So now they specifically target the servers where the backups are.
We've definitely seen that in the the MSP space, where they've directly messaged the MSPs like, we know you have backups, we know they're cloud backups, and we know that they're instead of being like ephemeral, right, or they're closer to immutable. And so that wouldn't surprise me at all. You gotta cat and mouse.
Yep.
So guys, I don't know if you saw earlier, but somebody also direct messaged us and said, hey, there's a lot of hot news going on in regards to persistence. Obviously, we're biased and this is our piece. I know for a fact there's just a lot of these old school techniques that haven't changed significant. John, I mean, is it fair to see we're probably still seeing just as many scheduled tasks, services, shortcuts? I guess maybe now the shortcuts parse themselves. The LNK files start, self-parsing. That's a little bit of a change. Startup folder.
Definitely.
John, what else what else is the same in the persistence? And have you seen any major change, any raising of the bar? What are things like?
Not really. I mean, it's the same. Like you said, the self-referencing link files sometimes to get more clever. We've seen. I think a lot of it's more indirection. They'll go from directly calling a malicious command to packing it several layers deep. So a batch file will call a VBS script, which will then call the actual payload and those things.
Got you. So same technique, but a little, just enough obfuscation to be able to get around the detection.
Variations. Yeah.
Okay. But same root cause. And I think that's going to be a lot of our, I always read these historical retrospects that, people are saying a lot of the same stuff from 20 years ago, but the reason for it is, well, you don't have to reinvent the whole wheel. Maybe you just change out your, I don't know, one fancy rim for another rim for a better ride or something like that. So I do have a question, John. So, well, I guess a comment first. For those of you, especially those that have asked, like, where have we covered these before? YouTube loves to ban and block our content, but the persistence episode from June is still there. So if you are interested in learning a little bit more, you can still find this. We're at the 3-strike policy now. So we're in the process of having to move some of our stuff off of YouTube because we're now in jail. That's why you see some of these like missing dates and all kinds of fun.
Yeah, YouTube hates security stuff. So we're going to move to our own, our own hosting where we can host the videos and nobody can really do anything about it.
Yep. But I know with persistence, somebody actually asked, what are the thoughts on trick boot? John, I know this is interesting. So do you want to maybe start by introducing what the heck is this? And I think this is more, interesting about what's new is because, I mean, it was just announced a couple of days ago, the December 3rd. So John and Chris, you guys both worked hand in hand. What is this? Well, one, what is trick boot? And we sure this is not trick bot?
So it is TrickBot, but it's also TrickBot.
So for those that aren't following, the TrickBot malware, right? It's a worthy adversary for all of us in the SMB. They're another one of those teams who have taken nation state advanced, capabilities and tailored them for you and I and the SMB go-to-market strategy. How thoughtful of them.
Yeah. We talked about this before. I can't remember exactly what episode it was in. I mean, we definitely talked about ransomware as a service and stuff like that. And we kind of talked about how attackers have switched from just working as themselves, as like, I'm an attacker, I'm going to do all the work, try to get all the money, to, well, I'm really good at this specific thing. Why don't I turn that into a business as a service, and I'll rent that out to other attackers, and I'll let somebody else do a lot of the grunt work, and I'll do this thing that I'm good at, and this other stuff that I'm not good at, I'll farm that out to somebody else. And so we've really seen it go from single attacker, single attack, what they can do being small, to a community with multiple vendors providing different solutions. A lot of them you can plug and play. I mean, we saw this before, and we talked about this before, where Maze said, hey, we're shutting down. And for attackers, it was like, okay, we're going to take that and we're going to swap in egregor, and now we're going to go again. And now they're getting paid for the same stuff. They're just getting paid by someone else.
Guys, so for those that aren't tracking, so TrickBot been around from 2016. Chris is nailing it, by the way, about how the actual business model works. But I couldn't help but bring up the article that was referenced about, for those that weren't following, I guess a joint effort between Microsoft, I know ESET, the antivirus vendor, and a couple others, plus US Cyber Command, came together to take down TrickBot, the giant botnet. And here we are on October 20th, right before the election. Everybody's celebrating. It's not going to be able to potentially manipulate the election. And you see some articles ringing ding dong, TrickBot is dead. They're really on the run. And followed up by like 11, 12 right after, like the Energizer Bunny, TrickBot goes on and on. So what is that? I mean, when you talk about articles that age really fast, like,
yeah,
we're at October 20th. That's not even a month, right? I'm sure that was a painful article to write, but poor Jai here having to come in and say like, yeah, actually after this, everybody's seeing and observing the signs that they're back better than ever. And I think we're talking about persistence, right? The same strategy. Remember all those persistence mechanisms we were talking about before, they were user space when they were living like the run keys, the scheduled tasks, right? That's that ring 3 of the OS. Some of the ones that Chris talked about were services were launching drivers. The drivers were getting exploited. There was various flavors of kernel persistence as well. Mac this year added all kinds of new things in 2020 to make it harder to have, kernel extensions or load stuff into the kernel.
Nope.
But I'll be darned, we've now since learned that TrickBot has got some R&D capability, right? We've always known that they've been modifying and going. Who wants to take a stab at explaining this real quick of what is TrickBoot, what is the play, and why should we highlight this as a changing persistence effort?
You want to take this one, John?
Oh yeah, I was just looking it up because I was going to say, didn't TrickBot earlier in the year, they went dark for a while because they were quiet and then came back with some additional capabilities, or was that last year when they added a whole bunch of email phishing and all sorts of other
They do that periodically.
capabilities for spreading.
Yeah, if you look at their history, they're active and inactive for a while, and active and inactive. And so it seems like they cycle between periods of like development and research and development to actively utilizing it. But go ahead.
Yeah. So in this case, the team at Advanced Intelligence and Clipsium has been monitoring the TrickBot network, and they found a particular piece of functionality that was interesting to them. And specifically, this piece of TrickBot allows it to inspect UEFI and BIOS firmware.
So you can imagine. This is, for any of those that remember that old Exhibit TV show in the US, what was it, Pimp My Ride? And it was always about I'm going to put a what in your what, right? It was, this is persistence for your persistence. So you can persist while you persist type thing. This is just absolutely, on our end, right. Of course we do, we're biased as a vendor, but persistence is our thing. And this is one of those that, even though this has been around, and we ended up ending this article with like, look, some of this stuff is not new. The first BIOS and rootkit conversations start about 15 years ago, all the way up to really good articles here in 2018. I actually think this is by CrowdStrike chief architect. I'm spacing on his name right now, Alex Ionescu. Amazing articles here for those that haven't found it. I'll throw the link in the chat for anybody that's looking for it, but it's not new, but this is still stuff that at Huntress, we were like, man, this is really, leveling it up. And we ended up having to leave this thing with like, what is Huntress doing? We're going to have to keep a stinking close eye on this situation, because right now they're abusing a legitimate driver. It's called read, write everything. And with this legitimate driver, similar to Chris's exploitation of that Gigabyte driver we started this episode with, they're actually using this legitimate driver to be able to communicate back and forth with the BIOS, the firmware, et cetera, to be able to gather information on what version. You can imagine this is the beginning of them doing some type of larger, well, am I going to, be able to exploit this? Do I make an implant? They might not even have made an implant for the BIOS yet. So let's not overreact, but let's keep our eyes open in 2021 and realize that persistence on your BIOS that used to be related to like, nation state actors, maybe this truly does come to the level of like, SMB type threats. And as of right now, I mean, I think guys, when we did research, we discovered that the paid for version, Windows Defender for endpoints has a UEFI scanner. Is that correct, guys?
Yes.
And it's just a basic scanner. It doesn't appear to be the end all be all. And I think there was a couple others. I think maybe ESET had a UEFI capability, if I recall. Yeah, you receive UEFI detection, but this is still a whole lot of uncharted territory. And Chris, I think you were the one who looked this up on Twitter. There's still a lot of security researchers that are like, I've been trying to, sound the alarm for a while. What was that all about?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people. So in a lot of cases, what we see is there's a big disconnect between security researchers who are doing advanced research and trying to figure out new things and new ways and to do stuff and exploits. And there's a big disconnect between them and what actually happens in practice in the real world in businesses where there are consequences, and turning things on or turning things off or disabling capabilities has real world consequences on whether or not the business can execute what they need to do and that kind of stuff. So there's always this tension, right? You need the security researchers pushing the boundaries, pushing the envelope to figure out what is the next thing that could happen, because that gives defenders and defense vendors like us time to see what's potential there, plan for something and build something. But there's a massive disconnect between research and practicality. So I saw a lot of people on Twitter saying, hey, this is nothing new. Why is everybody getting excited for this? We've been telling everybody that this was a possibility for years and years. And I think what they failed to understand is like, yes, it was a possibility. And like some crazy advanced nation state people had it. But now we're talking about this is being added into TrickBot, which has, tens of thousands of new infections on a daily basis and is not just used for very specific targeted attacks like you would see with nation state. This is just, let's shoot this across the internet and get everybody. And so I think that was the big disconnect that they missed is like, this is important because this is the first time we've actually seen this implemented. And while it hasn't been weaponized, they're at least trying to understand how effective could this be across the TrickBot infections.
Yeah. So I think that's a perfect way to highlight. Yeah, persistence was pretty lame in 2021 until some of this just started happening. So it's that cat and mouse. And maybe my favorite meme of all the ones that I just found on Twitter real quick, people said, what do they do? Do they, when their stuff starts getting caught, when they're signatured at TrickBot, do they just go away for a couple months? And the number one tweeted meme was Dr. Dre talking about, he had to go in the lab with a pen and the pad to get his damn label off. Obviously the label being detection. So, TrickBot thug life, I guess. But I appreciate the heck out of that.
I was gonna add, we forgot that this wasn't the first UFEI. A couple back in October, there was one about using UFEI persistence, some Intel update that when the system would boot, it would check for the existence of the file. And if it wasn't there, the file would be copied back into from UFEI.
Yeah, never
evolving. It'll be interesting to see what happens next year with this stuff.
So huge kudos, by the way, to the Advanced Intel and Eclipsium teams that did that research. These are all, kind of the whole community coming together to be able to protect each other. Thankfully, the Advanced Intel team actually shared with us this information before it came public, so we could see if any of our partners were affected by this. Same thing for MSPs and IT departments that share threat intel from what you're seeing. So I hope even though we're talking about Tradecraft, at the end of the day, I think community effort is going to be what really pushes us forward. Moving on, John, we talked about persistence, but everybody always asks, well, how the heck were they even getting in there in the first place? Chris, you had talked about same story, different day. Everybody knows phishing, or I guess vishing. Yeah, I sound evil when I say vishing. Getting in an initial access, but I think we've seen, maybe some, new exploits this year that has been using, and I know this is probably if I recall, our most controversial episode that we did was on some of the initial access of just showing people of like how this works, and then talking about abusing privileged access as well. So Do you want to maybe talk a little bit about, what were some of the new big vulnerabilities of 2021, how they
Yeah.
were similar and how they were different, or sorry, 2020, and how they were same and how they were different?
Yeah. And did this one ever make it to YouTube? I think is that what you're referring to as like the most controversial? Because we were actually showing like attacks and how they could be done and stuff like that.
The
And that-
websites that were doing it, yeah, YouTube
Yeah.
not only gave us one strike for that one, we lost our appeal case, re-uploaded it, and got a second strike for that one.
Oh,
So,
nice. So, geez. Yeah, there was a big vulnerability that came out. If you haven't heard of it, it's called zero logon, and the idea here was that there was a protocol that was listening that was meant to do some back and forth and some negotiation. And some researchers found that there was a vulnerability in there that was pre-authentication. So like you'd connect to it and you could talk back and forth to it, but you didn't have to authenticate or prove that you were anybody yet. And there was a vulnerability that they could trigger that would allow them to reset the password on domain controllers or really any Windows system that was like connected to the internet. So if they could access your domain controller, they could change the password to whatever they wanted, or in some cases even blank it out. And that would either result in a denial of service because you could no longer log into your domain controller, or they get control over your domain controller. And at that point, they have control over your entire network. And so this was bad. We saw a lot of this happening and immediately being just sprayed out all over the internet, trying to find as many victims as they could, before people got caught up in their patching cycle. So this one's pretty nasty.
Yeah, no doubt. So I did miss a couple questions, Chris, and I don't want to, go off on a tangent real quick. So just a reminder for folks that ask some questions, I will get back to those in this episode for sure, because there's been some really good ones on UEFI that we'll need to make sure we have some, chance to be able to follow up with those. But what's scary about going back to this zero logon, there was other ones. I think Checkpoint found a vulnerability in DNS that was like 17 years old. But I guess the parts that are really bothersome, both to Microsoft, you see some of the government stepping involved. Yes, the 0 day was new, but let's be real. This thing was patched back in August 11th. What's insane is even the most modern research, this one being in October, it's just not happening. And even though different exploits, same darn problem at the end of the day, patching is hard, truly getting every box, especially on the boxes that aren't remotely administered as well when we're in this whole work from home type situation. I just can't reiterate enough that some of these are startling. I looked hard. We had access to a report that was given to me about a month ago in confidence, and I was looking to see if it had been shared publicly. But the long story short was one of the graphs showed the prevalence of how often they were seeing zero logon still exploited in the months of September and October. And they were just through the roof on a daily basis, seeing, hundreds of companies per day being exploited. And that might not sound terrible, but when you think about that in big game fishing, doesn't take many of these small little businesses for them to eventually find somebody who does business with somebody larger. So it just means big things. And I want to just reemphasize, like, patching is hard. We saw this with Eternal Blue and Bluekeep, those vulnerabilities that one was in RDP, the other was in the SMB stack from 2017 and maybe 2018. But where I'm going with this is like patch. I know, the number one question we tend to get asked is, Kyle, there's so much going on. Where do we start? Like, look at this. When we're talking about these vulnerabilities, where you start are your basics. Agencies released patch validation scripts. We're in 2020 and still trying to help administrators be able to determine if they've installed the patch. So let's just reiterate at the end of the day that it might be old, right? It might be more of the same, but if you don't have a process that scales in as repeatable, you're going to get slaughtered with the different, congrats, you patched against Eternal Blue. Well, here's, zero logon today, or that SIG red, which is the DNS vulnerability I discovered. So, and it's not just your endpoints, guys, right? We started seeing way more VPN compromises this year. I think it was it Pulse and John, that we saw a whole lot of, some of that initial access, or what were some of the VPN targets? Do you recall?
I'm trying to remember.
I can live Google this one to help remind me, since there's so many that happened this year.
Chat says Juniper, Fortinet, Pulse.
Fortinet had some old ones
Pulse.
in there. The Pulse
Yep.
one was definitely our most common.
F5 Sonic Wall. I think people are just
F5.
naming all of the VPN vendors now.
Let me,
I remember a bunch of Sonic walls, but I thought that was actually last year. But
you know what's funny about this is some
back.
of them were older, but the exploitation in this year. So talking about chat being on point, what do we call? We said Fortinet, thanks team. I don't think anybody called out Mobile Iron, but real quick, if we take a look, we've also got the Pulse Secure. We forgot Citrix NetScaler was
NetScaler.
very big on this side of the house. So it's just a reminder that it's hard to patch your endpoints, let alone when you start getting into VPN,
Hardware.
concentrators, hardware, your IoT devices. So we'll really beat that down of like Tradecraft is going to change up next year, but at the end of the day, the fundamentals are going to be the same. Gianna, I know with these exploits, a lot of it was as soon as they get in, there was still increased usage of like exposed credentials. I think it would be a shame not to mention that one, but as an initial access mechanism that got in here. But I'm curious, John, since you typically live in the after, post-exploitation world, you're seeing a lot of the downloaders, droppers, and stagers. Do you mind giving us just the real quick rundown of what's changed in 2020 and what's been the same for the downloaders, droppers, and stagers?
So yeah, for the same, like we typically see the same payloads. We call them PowerShell payloads, but basically any kind of script, PowerShell, Visual Basic, those things used as a persistence mechanism to download additional malware, be it a cryptojacking or some other form of malware that they're dropping on the box afterwards. So it's not living on the host itself. One thing that we've seen less of this year, which is interesting, is Pastebin and some of the other remote sites. Especially last year during the ransomware attacks, there was a lot of, they would get on the box and a script would run to download the payload from Pastebin, but we're just not seeing that as much.
Yep, no doubt.
Which is interesting considering those are hard to block.
I pulled up our old episode on the downloaders, droppers, and stagers from September. For those who just haven't seen those or maybe not familiar, we're talking about all the crazy different ways to abuse applications. So for instance, not quite a stager, but if you think about that read write executable application, it kind of was a proxy between the the data that it was trying to gather. This is a good example, obviously biased towards PowerShell. I think I saw a handful of other slides that were in here talking about the difference between staged and unstaged. So if you're at, right now with your team and you're like, I don't even know what stagers are, or I'm not familiar. This is a great, entry level. Hey, this is where it's going on, whether it's exploitation with buffer overflows or just trying to bring in that Chris mentioned with TrickBot being upgraded to, now distribute Ryuk or some other type of family of malware. This is kind of the purpose of some of this. So I really encourage folks jumping on board. John, I know we really beat up for Pastebin in 2019. Some of those harder to block websites, I think you covered Dropbox, but I imagine most of our audience is probably, either clients or themselves on things like, a Microsoft 365 stack. So just a reminder to folks, OneDrive for sure.
Yep.
Why do I need to worry about exfiltrating your data to some shady website that your DNS filter is going to block when I know you're never going to block OneDrive access? And maybe it's not even your OneDrive. It's my, Kyle Shady OneDrive access. But that's hard. This is where things are going, just as a, crystal clear. Yes, back in the day, they were still exfiltrating data to trusted websites, but now they're using and abusing, Google App Engine is there, Google Drive. We're even seeing the cloud services, chat services too. So Teams being used to store data. Discord is a malware, haven for actors not only stealing stuff and exfilling it to Discord, but using Discord's content management system. Or Chris, there's a better word for that I'm feeling.
It's like you're talking about the downloads where you can pin a download and stuff. Yeah, CDN.
CDN, that's a content distribution, and that's exactly what they're doing, using some of those. OneDrive not only to steal your data, but distribution of the downloaders, the droppers, and stagers. So keep that in mind that that's not going to change at all. Brian just mentioned in chat, by the way, those hospital attacks were heavily, being distributed through Google Drive. So that's awesome. Some of the other folks are in the chat saying like, Oh, that's it. I'm just uninstalling OneDrive. We're on a Zoom chat right now. Let's uninstall Zoom. Let's just pack it up. We'll go home.
Yep.
2020, declared victory.
Switch yourself to like an iPad or something.
Hide your kids, hide your wives. What about defense evasion, guys? I think everything we've talked about this episode has been about defense evasion. This seems insane to not highlight this a little bit with our 15 minutes remaining. So where do you guys want to start with? Maybe, do you have a favorite thing of, what you saw in 2021 with defense evasion?
I don't have a favorite thing. I think one of the key takeaways for me here as we really looked into some of this and tried to look back was that this of all the things we're talking about here, this one both stayed the same and changed at the same time. Like they stayed the same in how they were, how attackers were using it, how they were trying to evade defense, and that they were trying to use indirection and trying to use some other, signed application, legitimate application to execute something. But it continued to change in that they continued to swap around and find different applications. And I remember this was a big deal for us because, we've been, at Huntress, we've been working on managed AV and through monitoring and managing Windows Defender. And lo and behold, somebody published.
I know which one you're talking about.
Hey, Windows Defender can download and execute any file that you want. It's like, so that was something we had to address. And thankfully, Defender team was on it quick and they got it patched in like 2 days. But it was a thing.
Oh, man, I mean, look, this is like the perfect example of both what we talked about for downloaders and droppers and this defense evasion. So here is the, Microsoft, antivirus capability for, running all kinds of commands. It had an argument called download file. Take a look, like that Cobalt Strike beacon where a lot of people live in memory. It's an awesome, penetration testing framework that's paid for. But notice where they're streaming it off of, myteamserver.live, right? So, clearly there, that's a little bit of pain when you start thinking about like, this could easily been, maybe, the Office Live setup. It could have been a SharePoint. There's no reason that this URL couldn't have been just about anything here. And then they have access with a nation state capable pen testing framework that's meant to emulate top threats. But actors are definitely using and abusing this. I was curious if this one came up. I thought you guys might mention that one, or you might also mention the abuse of the app installer as maybe one of the coolest ones. John, you want to highlight this one of what they're doing? I mean, clearly we see some paste bin going on, but how did this one work? And would you call this more of the same, or would you call it changing?
Call it changing. This one's similar to, they're using app installer to download a file from Pastebin and then execute it. What's the 4 files doing?
4 files looks like it's iterating over some, folder here.
iNet cache.
Executing each token as files. Is it just executing? Run command if size is equal to and greater. This is not how you're supposed to do Tradecraft Tuesday. It's live analyzing your shape malware. This is what happens.
Because we all sit here with
before, but I was trying to remember what it was. Because I was going to say it's similar to other techniques we've seen in the past where they're using MS App Installer, but we've seen cert util can download and files as well. So,
John, what about 4 files? Are you seeing this? This is a good example of something that was in its heyday and maybe, later 2019, definitely 2020. Are we seeing as much end of 2020 of usage of 4 files?
No, I haven't seen many of them this year. Typically, we see in the past is 4 files would be used to iterate over the PowerShell directory, looking for p exclamation or asterisk sh asterisk .exe or something to pull out the PowerShell command. So it was not obvious that it was trying to run PowerShell. But
so no doubt defense evasion here is definitely going on. I have one of my favorites, which is ersnif at the end of the day. This is one of those, older school families of malware and actors that, they just don't go away. They earn it just like how we earn it in defense every day and we go home happy. I have to imagine they're proud of themselves, what they're doing. This was a indirection technique, John, if I recall, that was all about like confusing and bypassing the security products.
This is the evolution of the ersnif payload or footholds that we've seen over the last, I think we started seeing it in late 2018. So, the top one line 1 and 2, 3 is one of the first ones we saw where it's using WMIC, to create a process and run PowerShell, which reads from the registry. Then it evolved. They replaced WMIC with, on line 8, run DLL using shell 32 DLL to execute command, and then calling PowerShell. But you can see it's referencing the same format of the registry key that it's trying to grab. Oh, I copied and pasted the WMIC one twice, my mistake. Later, they just kind of got lazy and just called command.exe, calling PowerShell directly. But the newest one we've seen is on line 23, where they're calling command.exe, which starts a link file, which points to PowerShell, and then they call a file, in this case, that aviflers.ps1, and the contents of that PowerShell file is down below on line 26. It's the same thing. It's just reading from the registry and executing a payload out of the registry.
Chris, correct me if I'm wrong, but I happen to recognize some of this tradecraft from a presentation you and
Yeah.
I gave like forever and a day ago. I think maybe at DerbyCon or something.
2017 or something like that. Or was it earlier than that? It was like DerbyCon 7 or something like that. It was a while back where we talked about this, and well, this is why the format we chose for this was things that stay the same and things that change, because
You give me 1 second,
it
Jen.
stayed the same quite a bit. And like John said, they changed it a little bit to where, like, instead of executing it directly, they executed it like out of a shell script or something. It was like minor differences.
This is always that terrible thing when you present on some research and then you're like, oh, hey, by the way, warning, ersniff might do some of this indirection of run DLL 32, calling the legitimate shell 32, calling the shell exec run DLL to be able to nest commands. And then you look back in your article and you're like, oh gosh, way to go, Chris. Break the, causing all of our security to be more insecure.
Yeah.
Guys, I'm, there was a lot of people that were talking about, obviously versions of Defender having this, things that were pre-September, talking about all the updates that are happening to PowerShell to be able to keep up to date with some of these attacks or help mitigate some of these attacks. What's beautiful is your newer operating systems really are building a lot of these mechanisms. Like, I can't even emphasize the delta between Windows 7 and Windows 10 nowadays. Even Windows 7 and Windows 8.1 was a significant delta. You've got to move those, whether your internal assets or your clients. If not, you're just accepting risk, a significant amount of risk when it comes to defensive evasion capabilities. So, it is what it is. I think what we could say, though, is the icing on the cake is we have seen fewer incidents of MSP tools being used to obfuscate and deploy ransomware. So there's some, where that was really hot. The addition of two-factor, some better hardening, some patching. We still see, 1 or 2, whatever, occasionally happening, on the.
Nothing like 2019. 2019 was rough for that.
Yep. So guys, we are at, we've just covered a handful of things. I will reiterate 2, but I want to leave enough time for some questions, obviously predictions. And I think everybody personally wants to see me get beat up by my wife by not getting out of here soon enough. So,
5-minute countdown.
I will leave it. There are tons of these. I will grab right now the list and I will put it in chat for those that haven't seen this. But also we'll put it in this for anybody that, finds this elsewhere. I will mention that there's a lot available. Some of the questions people asked was 2019 rougher than 2020. I would say 2020 was more. It just turned out that 19 was something very specific to the MSP, and it was new, and we were caught off guard, and we were not a united community. So, Chris, I'm going to leave it now. I'll go quiet a little bit. 2021 predictions. What do you got, dude?
All right, so I kind of broke my prediction up into 2 parts. I wanted to do attackers and defenders.
Okay.
So for attackers, I think they're going to leverage more vendor phishing and social engineering to gain access and leverage to these cloud resources. If you think how many businesses now run on top of some sort of cloud, whether it's AWS or Azure or something like that, and they have all these cloud components, And the big push over the last couple of years has been take your infrastructure and put it in the cloud, put it in the cloud. Well, if attackers want to do that damage, like we talked about in some of the earlier stuff with ransomware, it's how do I do damage to the servers and all that kind of stuff. Workstations are cool, and I want to get those too. But if I can only get one thing, I want to do the servers and I want to take out your infrastructure, because that's going to really take your whole business to a halt. So I think that's where attackers are going. It's really hard to defend by vendors because they try to have to balance this, like, how do I provide good security, but also good customer support? Because if you focus too hard on the security, customers are going to call, they're going to want to do stuff. And if all you're telling them is, nah, we can't help you because you don't have this or you can't prove that, people are going to be upset with you. But on the other hand, if you just somebody random calls and you give them access to their domain name and you can point it to wherever you want, that's not going to be good either. So I think that's where attackers are going. Defenders, I think defenders need to refocus their efforts on protecting users at home. And this is hard for them because they don't have the ability to control the at-home network. So I would expect 2021 defenders are going to have to try and figure out how the heck to manage that when they don't have that network. They don't have access to the user's home router or whatever. And maybe that user's running Windows XP on their kid's laptop or something like that. So those are my predictions for 2021.
Cool. John, you're always, the silent co-founder, but I know predictions on your end, there was a couple that were, worthy of your voice. So what were they?
One of them we didn't actually get to touch on, but one of the things that we've seen more this year than we did in the past is legitimate tools used for longer term access. Some of the surprising findings were like an ngrok service exposing ports behind a firewall to the internet. We've seen that several times, as well as one that I had never seen before, secure socket funneling. And in addition to legitimate tools like AnyDesk and TeamViewer being installed, those are really hard to detect because they're legitimate. Nothing's going to flag them. So unless you're monitoring network traffic and specifically outbound network traffic, you might not catch it.
I could be your wingman here, John. Some TeamViewer action that I know that we presented on before, but so you're saying not only do you see more of this, evasion, you're specifically predicting that, correct me if I'm wrong, this was TeamViewer, right? At the end of the day, not the Windows event utility.
Correct. There was actually two scheduled tasks on this particular one. There was one to start TeamViewer, and this one stopped TeamViewer and then deleted the event logs afterwards. But because TeamViewer is legitimate, you wouldn't necessarily see it. I don't know what the scheduled task synchronized time zones has to do with TeamViewer, but
so context.
Context. But these legitimate tools being used to maintain longer term access. Whereas if you're dropping actual malware, you might get caught, but less chance of getting caught with legitimate tools.
John, is your thought then, audit applications? Is that what you're kind of, saying some of this, that you think it'll be important? I know you briefly mentioned for folks that didn't hear it, but like ngrok, this being a legitimate service that's being abused for illegitimate, traffic redirection. Okay. So
in this particular case, the host had VNC, legitimate tool. I mean, you don't see it that often, but it was forwarding VNC traffic using ngrok as well as RDP. And so these legitimate tools are harder to detect. And so it would be interesting to see if this becomes more prevalent.
I didn't see any weapons.
No, she did. Did everybody see it? The wife threatened, by the way, if I wasn't off by 2
I missed it.
and she'd beat me, and she just stuck her head in, threatened the
we
fist.
got 1 minute.
So I'm going to, John, I'm going to cut you off on your 2021 predictions.
Go ahead.
I want to hit twofold. What's beautiful about being in the SMB, which is a lot of where our partners and our partners' clients are, we do get to be able to almost look at the future without having to deal with the future coming to us today. So for instance, one of my favorite articles that just came up is yesterday. The amazing team at SpecterOps, if you haven't seen these, please take a look at the team. They highlighted that, look, evasion is going to be hot It's a topic that even there's actors, and this is some of these actors' notes, that are already tracking where do their macros work and what operating systems do they not work against, or what, different security flavors, that they track it this way. What's interesting about this article that I'll quickly summarize is in the enterprise upper mid-market where, kind of I would say the cream of the crop is fighting it out, where we at the SMB can learn from right now, would be my prediction would be watch where they're going to go and let us adapt from it. And what scares me a little bit is these are the folks that are going hand to hand with people with amazing EDR capabilities and amazing human analysts going toe to toe. And one of the things they actually said was, what if instead of testing TTPs against each solution and cataloging what worked and updating them over time, we instead, looked at the capabilities of the solution first and then pruned our larger list of available TTPs down. And you're probably like, that sounds like the same thing. What's scary is they start going into, I want to understand the functionality of that EDR tool. And I'll go, just for the sake of me not getting beat, all the way to the summary here. And what scares me most is they start talking about, like, what if our evasion could be completely dynamic based on what's available on the platform? Let's not do tradecraft that's going to get caught by that platform, all the way to the point that they go on and say, like, look, at the core, EDR agents are just pieces of software which collect data from a finite, number of available sources. Now, here it is. This is the one that's killing me the most. But if we can just cut off the supply of that data to the agent, we can avoid detection. You have how sophisticated correlation engines running in the server component is, meaning they don't care what's in the cloud or what those awesome humans are doing, if they can just make sure the agent isn't able to report it. So we're not having to deal with this quite yet in the SMB, but most of us are still just trying to get, budget for like a managed detection and response or an EDR capability or analysts that need this. I can tell you right now, this is the looking glass. This is the future of what 2021 in the enterprise is going to look. So we might have, a year or two to learn from it, but we don't have long for this to happen. So I would just really reiterate at the end of the day, we have to continue as a community leveling up our game. If not, the companies, IT departments that figure it out, MSPs, MSSPs, et cetera, that figure it out, they're going to rise. And those that don't are going to be left behind. I'm 3 minutes over, but I hope this was a real talk look at, like, how did Tradecraft in 2020 exist? How did it evolve already in this year? And I hope this predictions from all of us help give you a little bit of, as you're planning, hopefully you get a little bit of downtime over this month. And if you do have some of that downtime when it's, slows down for maybe the holidays, start thinking of how are you going to invest in your own team? How are you going to invest in your own education? Who do you partner with? Who do you outsource to? Who do you do it in-house completely on your own? I think I would leave that with, that's amazing. Guys, I do have to bounce, but I do want to leave it. Obviously, if anybody else has to go, feel free to drop. But there was lots of great questions. So I'm going to say, bid everyone adieu and drop for now. Chris and John, do you mind staying just a little longer, answer some questions?
Yep. Yeah, we can wrap this up. So thanks for hanging out with us for the last hour. Hopefully it was educational. Hopefully you learned something. If you have any questions, comments, suggestions for future topics, email us at tradecrafttuesday@huntress.com. Somebody had asked about CTF events, if any were upcoming. I posted that in the chat. There's a few coming up. Some of them actually are featuring challenges from our own John Hammond. So if you actually go back and look a few episodes, we did an episode on CTFs and how they can benefit your team and train and stuff. So I threw those links in chat. If you're looking for more of those, you want to learn about them, ctftime.org. That site tracks kind of all the CTFs, the challenges, the teams, ranks them, all that kind of stuff. So if you're interested in CTFs, that's where you should go. Finally, Huntress is going to be at some events coming up. We have the ASCII webinar on December 9th. So tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we're going to talk about stopping ransomware before it starts. That's a case study on Ryuk with Jeremy and Todd. So if you're interested in that, we will drop the link in chat. There is also the Datto MSP Tech Day tomorrow. So that's an event with Datto and integrations to Datto. Dave is going to be doing some demos there, 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern. So if you're interested in those, go check that out. We're also going to be at IoT SSA on the 10th. So what's that? Thursday, 11 p.m. Eastern. We're going to be talking about deception, deceit, and decoys, how hackers lay the mousetrap. That'll be by John Hammond. So a lot of good stuff coming up, a lot of content. Let me drop these links in chat. Make sure that everyone has them. I got to make sure Zoom is doing what it should be doing here. Zoom likes to switch up on me, and then I notice I'm like privately messaging people because they messaged us. Copy and paste. Okay, so I dropped the links in chat. So if you have any questions, email us. But until next time, see ya.
See ya.